Welcome, everybody. You're listening to Pfsa 21's Weekend Wrap-Up Podcast. Here is your host, Kevin Ferrara.
All right, folks, we are back here at the podcast. A lot of you are probably wondering, Kev, where the hell have you been? It's been over 2 months now. We haven't seen or heard a podcast from you. Again, folks, I'm back. Life in general has kept me away. I know that's no excuse. I owe it to my audience members, viewers, listeners out there to provide opinions, guests on this podcast, and that's what we're going to do. Today it's just going to be myself, as you see up on the big screen there. If you're watching on YouTube, the Firefighter Health and Wellness Conference, we had the 4th annual. I was invited to go out to exotic Beavercreek, Ohio, and provide a talk on military firefighters with AFFF and Pfas exposure. So that's really what we're going to do today. We're going to recap those slides, that talk. A lot of folks have said, hey, can you go over some of this stuff again? That's what we're going to do today. So before we get started, as always, let's hear from my favorite sponsor, Fire Department Coffee.
Firefighters work long shifts. That's the nature of the job. If your station is like most, coffee is what keeps you going. That's why you should check out Fire Department Coffee. Veteran owned and run by firefighters, Fire Department Coffee offers a wide variety of delicious coffee, including their signature line of spirit-infused coffee, all roasted by hand and delivered right to your door. Even better, 10% of net proceeds from every sale goes to benefit wounded, ill, or injured firefighters and other first responders. And they've got a special deal for the Weekend Wrap-Up listeners. Enter discount code AFSO21, that's AFSO21 at checkout to get 10% off your next order at Fire Department Coffee. FireDepartmentCoffee.com, that's FireDept Coffee.com.
All right, folks, welcome back. And before we get started, if you're listening on any of the different platforms out there on a podcast, be sure to like, subscribe. Same thing with YouTube. The more subscribers we get, the more likes, the more information is out there to be shared. And as you know, you've heard me talk about this in the past. FeedSpot has rated us number 6 for their podcast, Firefighter and Safety Podcast. You're going to notice up in the upper left corner, right up here, we are now Pfsa 21's Weekend Wrap-Up Podcast. We dropped the radio on there because it was a little confusing to some folks. They're like, are you a radio station? What's going on? So we said, hey, Pfsa 21, that's our parent company, Pfsa 21 LLC. For those that don't know, I'm the owner, consultant. So I just decided, hey, let's drop the radio, make it simple. And we just have Pfsa 21's Weekend Wrap-Up Podcast. So hopefully you like it. If you do, let us know. If you don't, let us know. Put it in the comments. So we love good and bad. It's all constructive criticism, makes the podcast better, and allows us to get information out to you a lot more. As always, you're going to hear, I've got some screens popping up down here at the bottom. You're going to hear the pager off in the back. I run with a volunteer fire department here in Central PA. So, we've got some folks out of town. And as always, recruiting volunteer firefighters is extremely difficult. So you're going to hear me say it at the end, but let's say it at the top. Please support your local fire and emergency services, whether they're career or volunteer, because really, folks, the service itself out there, fire protection emergency service, it's becoming harder and harder to get volunteers, to get members to join and also stay. So please, do what you can, support them, donate to them. And hey, if you want, join yourself. Every fire department out there, I know volunteer departments are always looking for men and women to go ahead and join their rank. So, look among your local municipalities and give them a hand. So, as I said at the top of the podcast, we're going to talk about the slides that I gave at the exotic Beavercreek, Ohio, 4th annual Firefighter Health and Wellness Conference. So, we've got up here AFFF, Pfas, and the DoD. It's just soap and water. That's what we were told. That's what I, as a firefighter, was told from day one, Chinook Air Force Base, 1991. We worked with foam when we did Block 3 at the time. It was aircraft rescue firefighting. That's not me in the picture. That's somebody else's. But that was at Chinook. That was the big potato suits. That was the space suit. That was the big hood that we wore over top of ourselves. And we never wore air packs. Those didn't really start coming into play until, sort of as I was wrapping up, after I was wrapping up at Chinook. The instructors, the torch guys, they never wore air packs. Not aside from the AFFF being inhaled, because you can get exposed via inhalation. They were sucking in toxic fumes from the fuel that was burning. And, who knows what the hell we burned out there. Those that are familiar with the military, the little red Bowsers, and we're going to talk about this in the podcast. Any given time, you saw rainbows coming out of that fuel pit, and you're like, whoa, what the hell is, burning in there? Nobody really knew. But AFFF for the longest time, it was labeled as soap and water, even up until this day, folks, up until this day. There's agencies out there that are calling firefighting foam AFFF, whether it's Class A, Class B, firefighting foam, as soap and water. And it's not, folks. It is not soap and water. It is not your dish detergent that you use in your sink. It's not the same. It's man-made chemicals. Now, granted, a lot of your dish detergent is man-made chemicals. But it's really not toxic. There is some toxic ones out there. We're not going to get into that today. There's a lot of natural soap and water, detergents out there. But when it comes down to firefighting foam, AFFF, it has man-made chemicals in it. A lot of those are Pfas. Now, when we talk about Pfas, we're talking about between 9,000 and 10,000 man-made chemicals. We have no idea, as firefighters, as emergency responders, there's no list that I've been able to locate that puts every one of those thousands of chemicals in order and describes their toxicity and everything else. I wish they would, but until PFAS is regulated, and Congress is working on that, the EPA is working on it. Until that is done, we as end users have no idea what's in these products. And it's not just firefighting foam, it's in firefighter turnout gear, and it's in thousands of other consumer products out there. You look at your cell phone, the protective glass. Hey, guess what? That's got PFAS in it. Waterproof cosmetics. You've heard me talk about this before. Round and round and round. I'm not gonna get into it today. We'd be here for days talking about that. So again, it's just soap and water. That's what we were told. That's me, Kevin Ferrara, Master Sergeant, retired U.S. Air Force. I'm also the owner, consultant, and podcaster here at AFSO 21 LLC. So Chanute Air Force Base, Rantoul, Illinois. You see the dates on there, 1965 to 1993. That's when the DOD was up in operation there at Chanute. You've heard me talk about Chanute before. After basic training down in San Antonio, they flew me to Rantoul, Illinois. Actually, they flew me into Champaign. We landed in the middle of a cornfield. You've heard me talk about this before. I thought, holy shit, I'm going down here. I am a firefighter. We're crashing. But that's where, Champaign's airport was at the time. It was surrounded by corn. Catch a bus, come down to Rantoul, Illinois, and we go through the DOD fire school. I think at the time it was 6 weeks. My mind's shot. It's hard to remember that far back. But different blocks. Block 3, as you see the pictures up there again, these are not my pictures. Fellow firefighters have provided these to me for use. And just to show, really what was going on at Chanute. So again, you see in the pictures, firefighters wearing their ensembles, no air packs, just standing around, sucking up foam, sucking up fumes, products of combustion. So, aside from the foam, the PFAS. Again, who knows what we were exposed to at Chinook. But Chinook closed in 1993. They transitioned from Illinois down to Goodfellow Air Force Base, San Angelo, Texas. That's where the current DoD Fire Academy is. And, you know, they used foam there for a little while up until it was, until the DoD, the Air Force said, hey, stop using it because of the toxicity, the environmental concerns. And, you know, you'll hear me talk about it in here, and you'll hear me talk even, you know, offline. The military, you know, I applaud them. They're looking at environmental concerns, but at the same time, they're putting the environment over life safety, meaning they're more concerned about the environment. And don't get me wrong, I'm not knocking that. They need to be concerned about the environment, but they're not, their primary concern is not with life safety, with human impact. And, you know, you're going to hear me talk about this. A lot of firefighters, a lot of veterans, a lot of dependents, anybody that has worked on or around, worked or lived on or around a military installation very likely has elevated levels of PFAS in their blood. And you're going to see some of those levels here in a bit. So the DoD AFFF PFAS timeline, 1966, the Navy was granted a patent for AFFF. Back in just a few years prior to that, they started researching. You know, they said, hey, you know, we need something that's going to put out these hydrocarbon fires, these jet fuel fires quickly, effectively. They worked on it, developed a design. They were granted a patent, and as you know, the military does not produce products, so they contracted out with 3M, one of the top 3 firefighting foam manufacturers, PFAS manufacturers, really, to go ahead and mass produce AFFF. And 3M was still, they're still in the game doing that. 1967, the U.S. Forrestal mishap, and you know, as I told folks out of the conference, the military does not have accidents; they have mishaps. And you're going to see a graphic here after this with the USS Forrestal. So then we had 1973, 74, 76, 78. The Air Force, they basically reported that AFFF was toxic. They did their own research, and they found that AFFF was toxic to fish, aquatic life. But then they also found, there in 1983, they did a study, Pfda, and determined that PFAS was toxic. So the military was doing these different research studies on fish, on lab animals, and they found, fish kills, basically the fish drowned because of AFFF. But they also found it affected the nervous system. And then it also caused tumors, in these test subjects, whether it be fish or lab animals. Some argue that, okay, these are fish, these are lab mice, these are, different animals that they studied on. The human body is different. Well, yeah, that's true. However, the way the toxicity works, scientists, researchers, they've basically said, hey, this toxicity is going to affect humans pretty much the same as it does to fish and lab mice and other animals. One can go back and forth on this, but at the end of the day, research today has found, PFAS does have a negative impact on the human body. So in 85, the Navy again reported, about AFFF. 1991, the Army actually put a report out, put a memorandum out that said AFFF is considered hazardous, should be replaced. Obviously, that was never done because I went through Chinook in 1991. Both times I was in the Air Force, we used AFFF, so obviously they never got rid of it. Continuing this DoD timeline, in 2000, the DoD alerted let me actually bring this up because I've got my screen in behind my camera there. So the DoD actually alerted that PFAS was identified by the EPA as environmentally persistent, bioaccumulative in blood, and toxic to aquatic life and laboratory animals. So again, the Air Force, the DoD was doing research studies back in the 70s and 80s. They had all of this information. They never publicized it. They never provided it to military members. Senior leaders basically kept it to themselves. But then again, in 2000, this was a year just before I came back in the military. I came back in 2001, back in the Air Force. So they knew it was toxic. They knew there was some concerns with it. So, they alerted pretty much themselves, the senior leaders. But that information never really trickled down to the end users, especially firefighters. So then in 2000, let me bring this screen up a little bit bigger here. Bear with me, folks. I'm trying to get back in the game here. 2016, the Assistant Secretary of Defense directs service branches to prevent uncontrolled release of AFFF. Now, I was on active duty at the time. 2016, I was actually at Air Combat Command headquarters, worked on the staff up there. I was filling the role of a command deputy fire chief. Some people, they contest that. They're like, oh, you weren't a deputy chief. Okay, I was filling the role. I was there. We had a fire chief, and then it was myself and nobody else. So, call it what you want. I filled the role. I was doing the work. That's that. So, anyhow, the Assistant Sec Def, again, alerted branches to basically control AFFF release. You're going to see some graphics, some pictures in here. That didn't happen, especially off base. AFFF was still being used off base on actual emergencies, and the spillage, the wastewater, all that stuff was not controlled. It ended up getting into the environment, got into stormwater systems, and very likely got into ground and drinking water sources. So 2016, 2017, legacy C8 AFFF was replaced with eco-friendly C6 AFFF. Research is already coming in that shows C6 firefighting foam can actually be more harmful than C8. Just the way that PFAS chemicals break down when they're used. So, that's even more of a concern. So here, I remember managing some of this legacy, this swap out of foam, and they spent millions and millions of dollars doing this. And that was the foot stomp. They kept promoting, C6, it's the eco-friendly, it's the safe stuff. It doesn't contain PFAS, it contains just a little bit of PFOA in it. We're on the path to being environmentally conscious, we're environmentally friendly, we're doing the right thing. Well, independent research has found that's not the case. The C6 foam can actually be more harmful to the environment, to the end user, humans, than originally thought. So here we have FY24, according to the 2021 National Defense Authorization Act, FY24, DOD, Congress has mandated DOD to go to a non-fluorinated firefighting foam. So they're going to spend millions of dollars more to swap out this legacy, because legacy C8, now you're going to have legacy C6, foam getting swapped out. And you'll see in parentheses there the triple rinse, those that are watching on YouTube. So what that means is that the Air Force did a triple rinse of their apparatus as they were swapping this out. And we're going to talk about that here. But what we're finding out is that triple rinse, all that effluent, was polluted. It was contaminated. It contained high levels of PFAS, and the apparatus, because it was not properly cleaned, it contained PFAS. So in essence, they took out the old C8 foam, put in the new C6 foam before they actually cleaned the tanks. So they cross-contaminated the new foam coming in. So there's no way. I will put my reputation out on the line. I will say this. There's no guarantee any of the apparatus that the Air Force did a triple rinse on is properly cleaned, is PFAS free, or is safer than it was beforehand. And like I said, we're gonna talk about that here later on in the slide. So in 2020, the DoD begins testing firefighters for PFAS in blood. You'll notice firefighters is in quotations. There's a reason for that, and we'll talk about that here. And then 2021, that bombshell report, you heard me talk about that before here on the podcast, and I'm going to put a link to it, in the comments in the description of this podcast. But basically, the DoD Inspector General, the DoD IG, released a bombshell report calling out the DoD for not doing certain things, especially having no intent to track, trend, and analyze PFAS blood tests for military members, which was a shock because they're required to. So you heard me talk about before, with the DoD being mandated, fire emergency services within the DoD to control AFFF release. Does this look, those that are watching on YouTube, is this controlled? And for those that are listening on the podcast, this is a graphic of Kirtland Air Force Base firefighters in Albuquerque, New Mexico. They got called out mutual aid to a recycling plant fire. It was a stubborn fire. They couldn't get it put out. They contacted Kirtland Air Force Base, said, "Hey, you guys got foam, right?" And they're like, "Yeah, we got a bunch of it. Hey, how about you bring some of that over here? We can, put it on this fire and try to knock it down." So Kirtland was happy to oblige. They brought out a crash truck, a P-23, foam trailer, some manpower. They ended up using, I think it was like 1,300 gallons. It was easily over 1,000 gallons of foam. That's just the concentrate. That's not factoring in the water. So, obviously when you use concentrate, you add water to it. It's a 3% foam. So 3 parts foam, 97 parts water to, if you're looking at whether a gallon or 100 gallons. And this is the result you get. For those watching, you can see it's a pool of AFFF. That's just, it looks like it snowed in New Mexico, in Albuquerque. It's insane as to what they did, how they did it, and the fact that it was not controlled. So, is the Air Force liable for the environmental damage because of this? That's a question that's been going around for quite some time, is that, because they revamped their mutual aid agreements. Basically, the military attorneys got involved and they said, "Hey, how do we word this mutual aid agreement to where, we can hand off this foam to a local jurisdiction, local municipality, and we, wipe our hands clean of this, So, a lot of fire departments, they actually reached out to me. They're like, "Hey, should we sign this?" And I said, absolutely not, because what's going to happen is that if you call for mutual aid for foam, and I'm focusing on the foam portion, manpower, all that other stuff, that's a different avenue to run down, different rabbit hole. But for the foam itself, I would not sign it, just for the simple fact that, yeah, the Air Force is happy to bring this stuff out, but they're going to hand it off to that local municipality and say, "Here you go. How you use it in the manner in which the manner of, how much you used, how it's applied, all those factors come in play." it's not on us, and that's completely wrong, because the Air Force has knowledge that the firefighting foam is toxic to both humans and the environment. So if they are willingly providing that foam to a local municipality that may not be unaware, and they don't say anything, that's bad on the DoD. That's bad on the Air Force or whatever branch decides to go ahead and provide that to the local municipality. In that case, in my opinion, they should absolutely be held accountable, held responsible for that contamination. That mutual aid agreement should be null and void at that point, because you are introducing a toxic chemical into the environment, exposing humans, firefighters, to that. And if like I said, if you have knowledge of that and you don't tell somebody, just like the foam manufacturers have for decades, they need to be held responsible. They need to be held accountable for that. So moving on, the DoD IG inspector report, like I said, hang on a second here. I can't go ahead and increase that. I'm talking to myself here. So the DoD officials, they come out, and what the IG folks had found, they said, the DoD officials do not plan to track, trend, or analyze the results of Pfas blood tests conducted on DoD firefighters at a DoD-wide level as required by DoD Instruction 6055.0. So in that, without getting too deep in the weeds, basically 6055.0 goes in there and says, hey, if you're going to start, monitoring certain tests, you have to track, trend, and analyze that for, assessments later on, to be able to convey that to the military members themselves. And the DoD essentially found, hey, you failed to do it. You need to do it. To my knowledge, nothing has come out of this yet, to where there's going to be guidance put out mandating this track, trend, and analyze. I sort of had I had a feeling they weren't going to do this as soon as I saw the 2020 NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act, mandating that the blood test be offered. Again, this blood test is not mandatory for individuals to take. And there are many firefighters, military firefighters, whether military or DoD civilian, that have refused this test. I'm telling you guys right now, guys, girls, do not refuse this test. When you go in for your annual occupational health exam, get the blood drawn for this Pfas. It is a baseline. Those numbers have meaning, despite what the DoD, the DoD right now has no idea what these numbers mean. Really, a lot of folks have no idea what these numbers mean. I'm going to go over those numbers and explain why they are important to know. Also, for those, when you turn down this blood test, and we're going to talk about this later on here in the podcast. Matter of fact, let's just hold off until we hit those slides with the Pfas blood test. But going on even more here. Again, DoD, the IG report says DoD officials have not proactively identified, mitigated, remediated containment effects from PFAS containing materials other than the AFFF at DoD installations. So what they're talking about there is that they know AFFF contamination, all of the contaminant effects, the environmental. But what about the other stuff that contains PFAS? What impact? What effects have those materials caused throughout military installations, and how are they handling those? So, again, they looked past the AFFF, and they said, we also need to look at other things that contain PFAS. The big one that's being looked at right now is carpeting. Those in the Air Force, all the time, a new commander comes in, they're authorized to go ahead and revamp their office. So they rip and tear, they tear out the carpet, they put new furniture in. A lot of those products contain PFAS. So there's going to be regulations that are going to come down, at least we hope, that stipulate that, anything that you put in there, whether it's, a fabric, carpet, furniture, it cannot contain PFAS. So it's going to be interesting to see some of the furniture and other things in these, that's going to be acquired. So 2011, the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition Technology Logistics issues the Chemical and Material Emerging Risk Alert, aqueous film forming foam AFFF. So there was this risk alert that was sent out in 2011, but hey, guess what? It was never conveyed. It was never trickled down to those who really should have been aware of it. I was already back in the military. I was already back in the Air Force in 2011. I had no idea this risk alert came out regarding AFFF. A lot of us didn't know about it. And had it come out, we would have very likely taken better precautions to minimize or eliminate, unnecessary exposure to AFFF. But this particular alert was never coordinated with folks, boots on the ground, if you will. So it states AFFF contains chemicals that present human health and environmental risks and require special handling and disposal. Well, no shit. We know that now, but apparently they knew it back in 2011 and never said anything to the military members. Again, you have senior leaders in the Department of Defense, in the military branches, that were aware that AFFF was hazardous, toxic to both the environment and personnel, and they sat on this information. It's you see on there, it says not a requirement for DoD components to act on the 2011 risk alert. Well, it's because there was a loophole in there that basically said, hey, they don't need to really act on this. They dropped the ball. So whether it was a requirement or not, it's the principle. It's you morally, ethically, somebody should have looked at this and said, hey, hold on a second. This risk alert is putting lives in danger, personnel in danger, the environment in danger, water sources, ground and drinking water sources in danger. We should probably act on this. But hey, guess what? If you're not mandated, that's the problem. That's the loophole that's going on in the DoD, is that they don't do anything unless they're told to do so. Unless they're given an order, given a command to do something, they're not going to do it. And that's what happened here with this 2011 risk alert. Firefighters, like I said, we were not aware of this 2011 risk alert. Matter of fact, I was at Air Combat Command headquarters during this time. You would think this risk alert would have came through each MAGCOM at the staff, but it was never given. So, it's interesting that the DoD IG found this, and they did a great job, digging into this AFFF, that they found this. But, I really wish this risk alert would have been socialized out rather than kept close hold. So you heard me talk about before, I think it was 1983, the Air Force did a study, Pfda. It's a C10. So remember how we had Legacy was a C8, the new eco-friendly was a C6. This stuff is a C10. It is not being tested by the DoD. It was discussed in that 1983 report that showed it's toxic, but it's not included in the current PFAS 6 testing, the blood testing. My question to the DoD, and every time I try to reach out to the DoD, I get crickets, I get no response, emails are ignored, and that's fine. I'm going to keep presenting this information, myself and others, until they do step up to the mic and start talking about this like they should be. But it's a long chain fluorosurfactant. Basically, it's just cutting down that surface tension. Applications include a wetting agent and flame retardant. Now, when I saw flame retardant, I'm like, that's interesting because the military is looking at flame retardant uniforms. So is this Pfda, this toxic chemical, going to be included in military uniforms? I would love to know when you look at the J list or J Fire, the ChemBio ensemble that's being used by the Army and the Air Force. I would love to know what PFAS chemicals have been incorporated into that material, into that fabric. And it's very likely it's in there. Like I said, PFAS consists of 9,000 to 10,000 man-made chemicals. They've got to put something in there to have that water repellent. What is that surfactant? We don't know because, it's industry trade secrets. The military is not talking about, what's in their product. And I get it. Is it a national security issue? Not really when it comes to water. But at the end of the day, the end users have a right to know. They have a right to know what's in their products that they're putting on their bare skin. You look at firefighters when they wear this J-list suit. They're wearing shorts and t-shirt typically. When they go into this certain mop level that they have to go ahead and don this ensemble, they're usually wearing, just downtime gear. Shirts and, a t-shirt and shorts. A lot of bare skin is exposed. It's coming in contact with this ensemble that, in my opinion, just based on what I found, it very likely does contain PFAS. So now they've got this direct exposure that PFAS is being absorbed into their skin as it abrades. The fabric is rubbing up against the individual. Small particulates are coming off. You can actually inhale this, ingest it. So there's a lot of routes of exposure to this. And then add the fact that you're putting on PFAS containing, turnout gear. So you're getting a double dose of PFAS, but nothing's being told to the firefighters. Nothing's being told to the emergency responders that, hey, there could be a health risk with this uniform. So, Pfda, in 2020, California actually banned its use as an intentionally added ingredient in cosmetics. So again, it goes back to these manufacturers. These manufacturers know exactly what the hell is in their products. They know, but there's no regulations, there's no requirements for them to convey that to the consumer, the end user. I've demanded, especially with foam, an ingredient list. If you're a foam manufacturer, even a turnout gear manufacturer, provide an ingredient list as to what's in that material. Really, and it should expand beyond that. Every manufacturer out there, you go to the grocery store, you see an ingredient list. You pick up a can of soup. Okay, you've got an ingredient list. Yeah, they can consolidate some things in there. It's not going to break down. This is exactly how much of so and so is in there. But at least they're providing that so you as a consumer can make an informed decision whether you want to consume this particular soup or that particular soup or that cracker or that bread or whatever you buy at the grocery store. Unfortunately, we as consumers, when it comes to manufactured products like turnout gear, foam, waterproof clothing, carpeting, and the list cosmetics, and the list goes on and on and on. We don't have that option. We can't make an informed decision really as to what's in there. You sort of got to dig and try to find online through these independent researchers, these third-party researchers, as to what is in these products. And we shouldn't have to do that. We should not have to do that as consumers, as firefighters. We should have that information readily available. So as you see that the health risks, those watching on YouTube, health risks similar to PFOA and Pfas, and it decreased antibody response to vaccines. Now this one it's a little bit of a concern because with the COVID vaccines that are going out there, military, you run the gauntlet. when you deploy, you've got your immunizations, your vaccine list, stuff that you got to get every year, whether it be a flu shot, COVID shots, vaccines, anything like that. If you have high levels of Pfda, it could very likely affect your response to these vaccines. So, you're exposed, scenario, hypothetically saying you're exposed to Pfda, you've got high levels, you don't know it until you get your blood tested. But let's say you have high levels of Pfda in your blood, you're getting ready to deploy downrange. To my military folks, again, you go through the gauntlet, you're getting all these different vaccines, boosters or whatever, you think you're protected, and then all of a sudden, boom, you get sick, or something happens downrange, and everybody's like, well, what happened? He was vaccinated and, he got all this stuff. Unless they're testing, unless they reverse engineer it, backtrack it, whatever you want to call it, to find out if you had high levels of Pfda in your blood. And I'm not saying if you have high levels, it's going to automatically decrease your antibodies. It increases the risk. Same thing with Pfas, Pfas, those different 6 chemicals. I'm not saying, nobody is saying, if you have elevated levels, you will get cancer, you will get sick. We simply don't know yet. We won't know for probably decades, how all of that correlates to each other. What we're saying is that when you have these elevated levels, your risk is also elevated. So again, if you have elevated levels of Pfda, your risk of a decreased response to vaccines also increases. Among other things, we're still learning about Pfda, but apparently the Air Force knew about it back in 1983 and probably before that, and didn't really say anything. So should this particular chemical be included in the PFAS blood testing? Absolutely. And that's something I'm personally pushing for, is to get this particular chemical added to the PFAS 6. So if it works, if it gets in the 2022 NDAA, you'll have a PFAS 7, not just a PFAS 6. So here's this screenshot of the 1983 Air Force report on Pfda. There they say it's more toxic than PFOA. Well, if they knew about it then, why wasn't somebody told about it now? When they decided to do this PFAS blood testing, okay, we're testing for PFOA because it's toxic. Somebody said, PFOA is toxic. We have to test for it. Well, if the Air Force knew back in 83 that Pfda was more toxic than PFOA, why the hell isn't it in the blood test? Nobody can tell me. Nobody in the military can tell me why that chemical, that man-made chemical, is not being tested for. Do they not know about it? They absolutely know about it. You're looking right there at the 1983 report. Somebody knew, but it's this breakdown in communication, folks. They are not talking about this, and they really need to. So here's something interesting that I found as I adjust my seat. 3M's 15 June 1970 letter to the Fire Journal. That was NFPA back then. They cited PFAS as being toxic. So, I get the military maybe not really knowing about PFAS. At the time, they did. But the fire service, why is it now? Here we are, 20, we'll go back, we'll even say 2019, 20, 21, the past 3 years, let's even go back, 5 years. We started hearing about PFAS. Why is it the fire service, NFPA, knew about PFAS back in the 70s, but it really wasn't discussed. It really wasn't disseminated out through the fire service, as such. Again, breakdown in communication, folks. Communication is key when you're dealing with all of this. And for whatever reason, it seems nobody wants to talk about it, or nobody wanted to talk about it back then. Were they? We could throw out hypotheticals left and right. Were they paid not to say anything? Maybe. That's typically what we see, is that, hey, big companies like to, pay off certain people, be like, hey, keep this hush, hush, hush. I'm not saying that happened, but those things do happen. Again, that's the question. Why wasn't this information provided? Those questions remain unanswered. So you heard me talk about earlier the Forrestal mishap, 29 July 1967, the day the U.S. Navy proved to the DoD AFFF was effective. Now, you're looking at those pictures and be like, well, it doesn't look very effective to me. That's because on the deck of the carrier, there was a lot of damage. A lot of the hand lines were damaged. They couldn't get, the foam on the fire. Bombs were blowing up. It penetrated through the flight deck, got down into the hangar bays and everything. Fortunately, those fire suppression systems were still functional. They were using AFFF at the time, despite the fact that AFFF was recently patented by the Navy. So it was out there. They had it on the Forrestal. And, it was effective. That it essentially, it held the fire until crew members could could really get a good handle on it and knock it down. And they end up, saving the ship. It didn't sink. But unfortunately, as you see, there was a lot of casualties, a lot of aircraft loss, a lot of financial damage and loss on there. So, after this mishap occurred, the Navy, the Marines, they all said, hey, we want AFFF on our ships, even on land. We need to have this stuff. So that's sort of where it took off. Now we see, AFFF is used pretty much every military installation, whether it's on an airport rescue firefighting vehicle, if it's on an engine, for car fires, fuel fires, anything like that. It's out there. Of course, the FAA, commercial airports are using it, municipalities, local, fire departments, volunteers, they're using it. So firefighting foam is pretty much everywhere out there. So this is what the Navy does. Those that are watching on YouTube, I apologize to those that are listening, but it's basically a bunch of pictures that shows Navy personnel spraying AFFF as they clean the flight deck, they clean the hangar bays, and they're out there with scrub brushes, basically, swabbing the deck, if you will, wearing minimal PPE. These individuals are highly exposed to AFFF. That does contain PFAS, PFOA, despite what manufacturers are saying. It may not be the same amounts as before, but these chemicals are still in there, among other chemicals that we don't even know what's in there. Because as we talked about before in another podcast, if you remove PFAS, if you remove PFOA, you remove any chemical in there, in order to maintain the same characteristics, you have to introduce a replacement chemical. What is that chemical? We have no idea. We may never know, again, until regulations are out there or set in place. These manufacturers of these products are not obligated to go ahead and divulge that because it's industry trade secrets. There's a lot of competitiveness to it, and they simply will not tell you. You look at what happened in Parkersburg, West Virginia. During the conference, Rob Balot was actually there. He talked about it. 20 years that court case took to come up with a settlement. Are we going to have to wait 20 years, for what the military firefighters are going through? I hope not. There's enough research out there. There's enough evidence out there. There's enough replacement products out there. They could make a switch. They could minimize or even reduce this exposure. But the military is dinking around, and really it comes down to the mil spec. They won't change the mil spec. They're demanding foam manufacturers conform to the mil spec. So the foam manufacturers have to make their products to meet the mil spec rather than the mil spec change to meet the products. And there's, like I said, there's a lot of products out there the European Union is using them today, that are much more safer. But for some reason here in the United States, that's not the case. More pictures. These are hanger dumps, high expansion foam. High expansion foam is toxic as well. You've heard me talk about this on different podcasts and show pictures of firefighters, military firefighters. That's what's up on the graphics here. If you're watching on YouTube, you've got firefighters out there, minimal, PPE. They're not wearing proper PPE. You've got the Marine Corps Air Station Futenma mishap, if you will, or incident. It wasn't an accident. It was just, somebody decided to put some Marines in a hangar. They decided to go ahead and use a barbecue grill. They did not turn off the fire suppression system. So once the grill got hot enough, they had open flames. The infrared system picked it up, said, hey, there's a fire inside the hangar. Let me go ahead and dump some foam. 60,000 gallons of foam concentrate and water was released because nobody could figure out how to shut the damn system off in time. 35,000 gallons of that foam, that mixture got off the installation into the local area. And really the only way we knew about it was because somebody took a video of the foam floating down through the local area. There was some testing done as to Pfas contamination. It came back hot, the ground soil. It tested positive for PFAS. They ended up, one of the graphics here on this slide shows Marines bagging the contaminated soil into sandbags, which were then put into cardboard totes. And then apparently these totes were shipped off somewhere where they just dumped off the side of a ship into the ocean. We don't know, have no idea. Kind of like all the effluent when the Air Force did the triple rinse. Nobody knew where this stuff ended up at. So it's a mystery, as to where it located, where it was relocated, and what, if any, contamination was made upon relocation. So Air Force hangar releases, I was able to go ahead and find between 1990 and 1999 different reports throughout the DoD that showed, and I'm just looking at 42 reports in the Air Force, aircraft hangar activations, 15,734 gallons of AFFF concentrate. That's just the concentrate, folks. That was released. One installation had the highest reported, 2,500 gallons of concentrate. Again, you have to ask yourself, what the hell was going on? Why was that hangar allowed to flow so much agent before it was shut down? Total agent, water and foam, was 262,300 gallons. That's, again, this is just what was reported, folks. I know there are incidents out there, mishaps out there, accidental activations, if you will, or, that occurred that were sort of brushed under the rug. They weren't reported. Now you drop an ounce of AFFF, a foam, it's supposed to be reported. I still don't think that's occurring. There's been several. They go out and they do these hangar tests, to make sure, hey, that hangar is going to fill up, quickly. And, every inch of that hangar is, has foam in it. We see that occurring all the time when a new hangar is built, when existing hangars are remodeled, they retest the systems. And then, of course, firefighters are taking advantage of that. And they're getting in there doing the training. And I'm really not sure what the thought process is to go in to a hangar, with the foam, not wearing proper PPE, to rescue a mannequin, and then come back out and then be told, oh, that's all soap and water. And that's exactly what happened the last couple hangar activations that I was made aware of. I reached out to public affairs folks and they said, yeah, it's just soap and water. I'm like, no, it's not soap and water. It's toxic. You look at the safety data sheets and it clearly shows on there a percentage of unknown chemicals with acute toxicity. You have no idea what these chemicals are. Again, I go back to what I said with AFFF. Manufacturers are not required to put that on their SDS. Some do, some don't. But we as end users, we as firefighters, we should know what we are walking into. You know, the hazmat gurus out there. You're probably telling yourself right now, yeah, before we go into any hazardous materials environment, we want to know what we're walking into. The same should be when you're dealing with firefighting foam, whether it be, you know, AFFF, Class A, Class B, high expansion. You should know what you're walking into. We know this stuff is toxic, so we should know what's in there. And then wear the proper PPE. You know, is proximity or structural turnout gear adequate? Or should you be walking in there with a damn level A hazmat suit? You know, it depends on, you know, what's going on. You know, if there's no fire, yeah. You know, some people are probably going to call me out for this, but yeah, put a damn level A hazmat suit on and go in there and try to find this victim, because you are enveloped in toxic foam. You know, you can see this foam. It's got a physical characteristic to it. You can see it, you can touch it, you can manipulate it. When you wear a level A hazmat suit, most of the time you're dealing with an invisible gas. You can't see it, you can't touch it, you can't really manipulate it, but you're wearing a level A suit because of the unknown toxicity, the unknown, you know, characteristics of it. So you take the highest level of protection possible. Why would you not do the same thing if you're going to walk into a hangar that's filled with foam, there's no fire, but you're looking for victims? Something to think about, folks. If you got comments on that, please, you know, chime in, you know, in the comment section, whether on YouTube or on, you know, whatever podcast platform you're listening to. More pictures that I showed of hangar dumps, you know, and pictures of the Kirtland Air Force Base, you know, the Albuquerque incident. You know, again, just excessive use of foam, excessive foam being released, uncontrolled, and that's a concern. So I talked about how in 2016, the EPA established a lifetime health advisory for PFAS, PFOA. In drinking water, we said, hey, it's 70 parts per trillion. You've heard me talk about this before. And a lot of the attendees out there were municipal firefighters, civilian firefighters. We had a handful of some military folks that were in attendance, but for the most part, it was, you know, civilian firefighters out there, municipal. So, you know, when I showed them this slide, I said, you know, the Assistant SecNav, Secretary of the Navy for Energy, Installations, and Environment, they define 1 part per trillion as being equivalent to 1 drop of an impurity. So you take an eyedropper, you go bloop like that, and that's 1 part per trillion in 500,000 barrels. Now, a barrel is identified as 42 gallons each. So 1 part per trillion can pollute, has the potential to pollute 500,000 barrels, 32 Olympic-sized swimming pools, and each swimming pool is about 660,000 gallons each, and then 21 million gallons of water. That's just 1 eyedropper, 1 drop of pollutant or impurity, as the SecNav talks about. So this was just a picture of 2016, 2017 triple rinse. This shows, you know, engines being swapped out. I didn't have any graphics or any pictures of the crash trucks. But basically what happened was the Air Force triple rinse method, the simplified version of it is, excuse me, they drained the foam tank or cell, captured that legacy AFFF in intermediate bulk containers. I have ICBs, they should have been IBCs. Drums or cans. And then they filled the empty foam tank or cell with water. In typically the Air Force, they used hydrant water, cold water from the station, or like I said, out at a hydrant. Drove around for about 10 minutes, you know, making hard banks back and forth just to slosh that water in there. try to break up that foam. So then they drain that or pump the effluent from the foam tank into that ICB or IBC. You get it, intermediate bulk container. And they repeated that process for a total of 3 times. Well, depending on who you talk to, some folks tested that effluent, others did not. I have yet to come across any reports as to how much PFAS they found coming from each apparatus. So what they did after they repeated that process 3 times, that's the triple rinse, they put C6 foam into those tanks without doing any type of proper testing. You heard me talk about this at the beginning of the podcast, was that if you're not going to test that tank, that cell, to make sure that it is clean, and you put new foam into there, you've automatically contaminated it. If I was that foam manufacturer, I would be like, look, I am not responsible. And they should be doing their own testing, but they should have some type of statement, official statement that says, you put my foam in that tank, you are responsible for any contamination that is suspected or does occur. Simply because you failed to properly cleanse that tank or cell. You get a brand new tank right from the manufacturer. That's probably about the only time that tank or cell is going to be, quote, clean. It may still have some, residual stuff in there, some impurities, but it's not going to be the AFFF. Once you introduce that into that tank, especially in poly tanks, that poly is going to absorb some of that foam, that AFFF. So there's at the end of the day, there's really no way of assuring that tank is clean, other than to completely replace the tank or cell and all piping involved. There's some foam exposure committee actually suggests that to assure a clean environment for that replacement foam, completely replace the components. That's really the only way you're going to do it. Otherwise, you're going to cross-contaminate. So think about that. When the Air Force or the DoD here in fiscal year 24, when they have to switch out to a non-fluorinated foam, they're going to do this triple rinse again. And if they don't assure that tank or cell, that foam tank or cell, is properly clean, and I'm not saying get it down to 0. I mean, that's the goal, is to get it to 0, but get it down to acceptable levels. Now the EPA, again, at 70 parts per trillion. If you get it down below that, maybe that's fine. But until you test that, there's no way they're going to know that. So I think what's going to happen is, and I've been trying to get the DoD to understand this, but they won't respond. You have to clean the equipment. Otherwise, you're going to cross-contaminate it. And again, if I'm that foam manufacturer, that non-fluorinated foam, I'm going to demand that you sign something that says you assume all risk and liability of cross-contamination or contamination of that. Because if they do decide to test later on, and they say, hey, well, you had a non-fluorinated foam, but it came back hot for PFAS. If I'm that manufacturer, I'm going to be like, hold on a second. Did you clean that foam tank and cell? And if they say no, boom, it's on you. It's not my fault. So that's, we could talk about that all day long with that. So again, highly likely crusted AFFF remained inside the tank foam cell, corners of the cracks, corners of the tanks, piping, etc. after each flush, like I said. The effluent was collected by contractors, transported to an incineration sites where it was disposed of, or redirected to a location for storage. Again, I was at ACC, Air Combat Command, when this happened. We had no idea where this foam was headed to. All we did was we organized. Hang on a second, got a little something. Had something on my lip there. We We coordinated the effort to get the contractors on the installation, get the effluent once it was contained, and the firefighters put it all in these containers. So they were somewhat exposed, minimally, I think, at least I hope, when they were capturing all of this effluent. So the contractors got on base, loaded the stuff up, and then once it left the base, nobody knew where it went. Well, we found out where it went. It was carted across the country, 6 different locations. Were contracted to incinerate this effluent. We found that several of them had already had EPA violations, DEP violations. They should not have been even contracted to go ahead and do this. There was one incineration point where they found PFAS was going up the stack because it wasn't hot enough. So you had toxic gases going up the stack, floating downwind. It got into local water sources, so there was a moratorium put in place that says, hey, no more incineration. So now all of this effluent is sitting in a warehouse somewhere. As I jokingly said at the conference, Indiana Jones probably has it somewhere. You remember the movie? They put the Ark somewhere in this warehouse. We have no idea where this foam is, what they intend to do with it. Again, I talked about most unknown. No analysis of the effluent was conducted after each flush. If it was, we don't have those documents. The military is keeping them close hold. It'd be nice to know because, again, end users, if there's still contaminants, still pollutants within the tanks, within the piping, and firefighters go out and they spray each other down because that's the thing to do now is when you have a fire, you wash these individuals down with a fire hose to get the products of combustion off of them. Well, if the water that you're discharging has PFAS in it, you're getting the soot and grime off, but you're hitting them with PFAS-laden water. So are you really doing anything effective? So again, it's important to go ahead and test your apparatus for that. So South Bend, Indiana, they actually did something interesting. They sort of mimicked the triple rinse, but for these individuals, they actually did it 5 times. So if you see, if you're looking at the graphic here on YouTube, and I encourage, if you're listening on a podcast, by all means, keep listening, but check out our YouTube channel as well, and we'll have links to that here in the description. But again, it was similar to the Air Force triple rinse, but in this case, they used hot water, not cold water. They used hot water. So, you take a shower. Nobody likes taking a cold shower. You try washing dishes. This is a good analogy. You wash greasy dishes with cold water, you're just spreading that grease around. You use hot water, it breaks it up off of that plate or that pan, and then it takes, it's a little bit easier to clean. Add dish soap, which is a surfactant, and now you're breaking that surface tension, and now you get even more of that grease. So think of the grease as PFAS or foam. So if you use hot water, you get some foam off of there, and that's what you see, that very first one. They simply did a flush, hot water. They found about 387,000 parts per trillion of PFAS contamination coming out of the truck. Then they added surfactants, continued using hot water. And those that are viewing, you'll see the numbers actually went up when they added the first batch of surfactant. That's because of, the surfactant probably had some PFAS in it. And then it starts breaking off that foam, that PFAS that's within the tank. So it was expected, not really 20% more, but it happened. But as you see, they kept going down and down and down. At the end, after 5 flushes, there was a 74% decrease in PFAS contamination coming out of the truck. So South Bend is still doing, they're still doing the flushes. They were actually out at the conference. Some of the individuals that were involved, I got a chance to talk to them, not as much as I really wanted to. I'm going to follow up with them later on, but they said, they're almost wrapped up getting all of their trucks done to swap out. So they were being proactive. They went through everything, trying to, minimize this contamination, minimize this exposure. So you hear me say firefighting foams. Yes, they're out there. October 1, 2023, which is really fiscal year 24, the DoD must begin using non-fluorinated firefighting foams. Now, they're already out there. These non-fluorinated firefighting foams, like I said, they're already out there. They're on the market. The European Union is big on this. Australia is big on it. They've already said, hey, no PFAS in our foams, period. So, they're taking it seriously. And I say that because as you look at the EPA, as you look at, the military, they keep kicking that can down the road. They keep implementing these timelines. They could implement this almost immediately, but it's the DoD that doesn't want to change the mil spec. They want the manufacturers to change. Which is, it's backwards, ass backwards, as some people will say. Again, research has found C6 firefighting foams, despite being listed as biodegradable, some of those foams out there contain more fluorinated chemicals than legacy firefighting foams, in order to meet the same performance effective as C8 foams. So again, it's great. They took the legacy C8 foams. They're trying to make it more environmentally friendly. However, because they didn't really put much thought into this, whatever they replaced those, whatever they took out of the C8 foams, they introduced something else in the C6 foam that is making it a little bit more dangerous. But we don't publicly know that because the foam manufacturers aren't telling us what those replacement chemicals are. So there is a company out there, Green Screen Certified. Basically, this is an independent agency. They will test your foam to see if it's got, zero intentionally added PFAS in it. If it meets all of their requirements, they will give it the Green Screen Certified stamp of approval. And then, if you're in the market for buying firefighting foams, you could go down through and say, hey, this one's certified, this one's not. Make an informed and educated decision as to what you want to use. So their website, www.greenscreenchemicals.org. That's greenscreenchemicals.org. I'm going to have a link in the description for you to go ahead and check them out. So getting into the DoD installations having or suspected of having PFAS contamination. So we know over 700 active and former DoD installations out there. This is coming from the DoD themselves that have or suspected of having PFAS contamination in ground and or drinking water. Basically, I've told everybody, especially out there at the conference, if a military installation had or has a flying mission, you can guarantee AFFF PFAS contamination exists. It's a no-brainer because you've heard me talk about this before, and you're going to see it here in some slides coming up. We used to do an operations check every morning. We take the crash truck out, hit that foam discharge, spray it, and that eventually seeped into the ground, into the soil, into the groundwater, drinking water, depending on where you're at, and ended up polluting the environment. So a lot of the testing focused around fire training areas or FTAs. I emphasize the fact that yes, that's a no-brainer. You would say, yeah, okay, that's the fire training area. That's where the contamination is going to occur. But like I just said, we sprayed it up and down the flight lines, different areas on the airfield. as we were doing driver's training, flight line familiarization, we just pull over, boom, hit the foam, test it real quick. So you had different points of contamination that occurred around the airfield that most likely they were not testing. They were not testing at. They focused strictly on the more obvious, not the less obvious areas. AFFF was rarely contained, if at all. We never contained it. We sprayed it. The biggest thing was just don't get it on the flight line, because if you had an aircraft taxi or whatever, pilots would get pissed off. Base ops would get pissed off. And then sometimes you had to go out and actually hose it off because there was foam on the flight line. So it just made it slippery. So that was, it was a safety issue. Jet takes off. They don't want, slick tires. So drinking water sources, Cannon Air Force Base. You've heard me talk about this a lot. That was my first base right after tech school. Here's a graphic for those that are watching on YouTube. Cannon Air Force Base, Clovis, New Mexico, and Highland Dairy. And you're like, why the hell are you talking about a Highland Dairy? Well, according to a 2018 report, Cannon Air Force Base has about 27,000 parts per trillion of PFAS contamination. But the Highland Dairy, which is, close proximity to Cannon Air Force Base, is completely polluted with PFAS that originated from Cannon Air Force Base. So again, I spent 4 years there. Unknowingly, I polluted this individual's farm, the Highland Dairy, the aquifer system that runs underneath it. This next graphic, excuse me. Next graphic basically shows it's outlined in a white dashed line. The area being investigated for potential PFAS groundwater contamination. Well, I can assure you that area is polluted. That's sort of the aquifer system that supplies, a lot of folks in that area with drinking water. The Highland Dairy Farm, the owner, his family, they have PFAS in their blood. Their livestock, there's so much PFAS in their livestock blood that they have to, they're mandated, ordered, required, whatever you want to call it, to dump out the milk. They cannot sell the milk. So they're milking these cows every day, but they have to dump it out. And then just like the cows too, they cannot sell the cows to the local stockyards, meat processing plants, because the meat has PFAS in it, the cow itself. So, on top of that, things we talked about out of the conference too, is that you look at the biosolids. So, the military, the DoD just notified, thousands of farmers across the country about PFAS contamination. Well, they've done that for several reasons. One, contaminated milk. Two, the cow itself is contaminated. So if they take them to a meat processing plant, it's very likely that cow is contaminated. You're going to get cross contamination, and you're going to carve up these cows and sell the meat to the unsuspecting consumers. And then you've got the biosolids. So all that animal waste is ground up, is put into a biosolid. It's put into fertilizer. Those fertilizers, whether it be for the stuff you buy at Lowe's, Home Depot, anything like that you put on your flowers, on your gardens, or if it's industrialized, that you see large farms spreading out on their crops, that could contain PFAS as well. So there's a huge concern with this, and one that they're finally starting to talk about. It's like, okay, well, if we have it, it's very likely, if you own a farm, the livestock, and it's not just cows. I mean, you're looking at chickens, you're looking at pigs, anything that you have on these farms that you're going to consume in some manner could have PFAS contamination in it. So, excuse me. U.S. military installations with PFAS levels more than 1 million part per trillion. You've heard me talk about these before. England, the former England Air Force Base in Louisiana, PFHXS, which is being tested for. You've got 20.7 million parts per trillion was found in 2018. That's the highest level that we've seen of every area that's been tested. A lot of the folks down there, most likely, they have no idea the amount of pollutant that's underground. Naval Weapons Station China Lake in California, 8 million parts per trillion. And this one's interesting because this is where they're testing the new foam. So the DoD has narrowed it down to 6 different manufacturers for this non-fluorinated foam, but they're testing it out at Naval Weapons Station China Lake. So they're like, okay, who knows why they're testing it out there? They probably figured, it's already polluted. Let's just add more to it. Who really knows? But that's, one of the sources I found, that's where they're testing this foam at. My last base, you've heard me talk about this, Langley Air Force Base, Virginia, 2.2 million parts per trillion. To date, to my knowledge, the Air Force has still not responded and notified the public of the amount of contamination. I've said this before, the big concern is that you have fishermen, crab fishermen, dropping pots all along the shoreline of Langley. They're taking that catch, taking it down to the local seafood markets and selling it to unsuspecting consumers. Are the fish and the crabs contaminated? We have no idea because nobody's really testing it, but based on other areas, especially up in Maryland, along the coastline, they've tested and found PFAS contamination in aquatic life up there that's being sold, caught and sold to in fish markets. So again, Chanute Air Force Base, where it all started for me. You're looking at PFAS contamination, and this was, in 2018, 496,000 in on-base groundwater. PFOA, 148,000 parts per trillion. PFHXS, 806,000 parts per trillion in on-base groundwater. So Chanute it's a wasteland up there in terms of PFAS contamination, among other things that they've dug up there. But then you look at Goodfellow, current home to the DoD Fire Academy. Now, Goodfellow, I've gone round and round with a previous superintendent that was there that says, there's no PFAS contamination here. What are you talking about? You shouldn't be saying that. Well, guess what? The DoD submitted the report, and in it stated, PFOS, 110,000 parts per trillion in on-base soil. PFOA, 14,000 parts per trillion. PFHXS, 38,000 parts per trillion on-base soil. Add to the fact that the Air Force provided bottled water to local residents within a 1-mile radius of Goodfellow Air Force Base because of that fear or that known or suspected of having PFAS contamination in ground and drinking water. If one does not simply hand out bottled water unless there is a legitimate concern. From my understanding, they have since stopped distributing this bottled water, which could mean there's no more PFAS contamination, or they just said, that's it. We're done being, nice, a good gesture, but it's now your problem, San Angelo. We again, it goes back to this communication back and forth. This PFAS did not originate within San Angelo. It originated from Goodfellow Air Force Base. So, a lot of folks that you've heard me say this before, those responsible at the source, those at the source should be responsible. But it seems like, the DoD, the Air Force, Anything that happens within their fence line is their problem. Anything that happens on the other side of that fence line is not their problem. But that's not how this should work. As if you or I were to go ahead and pollute, as has been going on, within the DoD for decades, we would not be able to justify saying, well, I can't control what goes, past my fence line over to my neighbor's house. Well, you most certainly can, and you should be, and we would be held responsible for that. But for some reason, the military, the DoD, is not being held to that same standard. So this is just a picture of Langley. Those watching on YouTube here, you can see it's surrounded, about 2/3 of water, half to 2/3. Again, these are waters where, on any given day, if it's nice, you got people out there fishing, you got people dropping crab pots, and they're taking their catch down to the local seafood market and making a few bucks. Meanwhile, it's very likely those buying that catch could be consuming Pfas laden, fish or crabs. EWG, my good friends over at Environmental Working Group, they've put a map out there, and we'll have a link to this as always, for the PFAS interactive map. And this is, you see, it's just riddled with dots, with PFAS contamination. So when they put a dot up there, it means they've detected something there. There's purple for military, blue for drinking water, and orange for other known sites. So you've got California, Colorado, New Jersey. You can't even see New Jersey. There's so much there. What do we got there? We got North Carolina, Michigan. So it's really starting to pick up in more and more sites. So getting into, I apologize for this being a long podcast. There's a lot to catch up. But getting into probably what a lot of you want to hear about is this DoD PFAS blood testing. Again, the 2020 NDAA, Title 7, Section 707 has a provision of blood testing for firefighters of the Department of Defense to determine exposure to polyfluoroalkyl and perfluoroalkyl and polyfluoroalkyl substances, otherwise known as PFAS. So it began October 1, 2020. And this is where, remember how I said at the top of the podcast, you saw firefighters in quotation marks. The firefighter is defined by the NDAA, defined as someone whose primary job or military occupational specialty is being a firefighter. Okay, so that's a no-brainer for Air Force firefighters. We're all 3E7X whatever. For the veterans, it was 571XO. I think I was a 57150 when I got out. But those are no-brainers for firefighters. Now, where the waters tend to get muddy is in the Navy. So you look at all those pictures, descriptions that I said earlier with naval personnel pushing foam, cleaning the flight decks. You have assigned damage controlmen that are firefighters. That's their primary job. But then, of course, on a ship, when mishaps happen, like on the forestall, it's all hands on deck. General alarm, everybody's helping out. That's not your primary job. Even though the Navy may say, hey, everybody's a firefighter. Well, no, everybody's not a firefighter. That's not your primary job. So in that case, you would not be eligible for this blood testing. And that's something that I'm fighting for with Congress, is to take out that firefighter defined and replace it with something that says if you were exposed to, suspected of being exposed to, or could be exposed to PFAS, you should be tested for. Really, every damn personnel, military personnel, should be tested for, plus their dependents. And I believe there is a provision that could be coming out, could be being introduced to include dependents of military personnel, because if I'm drinking contaminated water, it's very likely my dependents were drinking contaminated water, at these different installations. So it's performed during the annual physical exam. If you miss it, you have to wait until the following. And I've already talked to firefighters, to where they missed it. It wasn't offered, and then they go back and they're like, oh, they're told you have to wait until next year. That's some bullshit. If you if you didn't get it during your annual occupational health exam or annual exam, and you go back like a week or so later or a month or so later, you should be able to get that test. You should not have to wait another 11, 12 months to get that blood test. They should be able to do that, at any given time. Once a year, not 5, 12, within that year. You should get it once a year, within that actual calendar year, or even a fiscal year. The other thing too is, you heard me talk about earlier at the top of the podcast, is if you're having thoughts of turning down this test, do not do it. Whether you're a military, DoD civilian, or municipal firefighter that's paying out of pocket for these, do not turn down the test. This is a baseline. You need to have some sort of record to start off with that says, hey, here's my levels, or, and then you go back the next year. Did they go up or did they go down? Hopefully they're going down, but if they go up, then you have to figure out, where's the source coming from? Why am I being exposed? Where's the Pfas coming from? And then, of course, you heard me talk about this, and I'm trying to get with the NFPA to get Pfas blood testing, but at some point, somebody has to make a determination that says, hey, once you reach this threshold, that's it, no more. We got to get you away from these suspected contamination sources. So, my thought is, if you're a firefighter and your levels are already elevated and you come back next year and they're even more elevated and they reach this established threshold and they haven't done it yet, I'm pushing for them to do it. If you meet that threshold, they've got to do something with you. They've got to take you off the floor. They've got to put you in management. They've got to make accommodations for you, so you're not exposed anymore. They should not. They shouldn't shit can you. They shouldn't fire you. They shouldn't lay you off or anything like that, because that's completely wrong. It's not your fault that you're exposed, unless you willingly went out and exposed yourself. So they should, by all means, make accommodations within your organization to keep you gainfully employed until those levels drop down, which could take a while, because PFAS has a fairly long half-life, depending on which chemical you're talking about. So again, we said, those with an this is the other one. So those with an occupational specialty as a firefighter but do not receive an annual occupational medical exam are ineligible. So, all the fire dogs out there, all the firefighters, okay, you take on a special duty assignment. We've seen firefighters, they go from, firefighter to door manager to first sergeant to recruiter to command chief, whatever. Once you separate from the fire department and you go into this additional duty, or other assignment that's not a firefighter, you cannot get this blood test. So, for example, say I'm a firefighter. 2020, I got my first blood test. October 1st, 2020, I got my first blood test. In 2021, I become a recruiter. Now my primary AFSC, my primary occupational code, has changed from firefighter to recruiter. I'm due for my annual physical. I'm not eligible for this blood test. but yet I'm still exposed to PFAS. So, if you're a recruiter for 4 years, 3 or 4 years, some folks even longer, you don't get a PFAS blood test during that time. So you got your baseline, but you have no idea what your numbers are after that. That's completely wrong. It needs to change. They need to take that verbiage out of there so that no matter what, once you start getting tested for PFAS, you continuously get tested for PFAS until you separate. And then, of course, you guys know, everybody knows, I'm fighting with the VA to get them to start doing PFAS blood testing as well. So when you transition from active duty to retiree or separated status, if you're eligible to receive care by the VA, you should be able to get a blood test through the VA. But right now you can't do that. They're not even entertaining that. According to the DoD or the NDAA, results are supposed to be maintained in members' personal medical records only, electronic or paper. Must be retained for a duration of employment plus 30 years. So if you do 20 years in the military, say the newbies coming in right now, they start getting their blood tested. 20 years plus 30 years. So 50 years from the time they first entered, if it's, after 1 October of 2020, their records are maintained for 50 years if they stay in, for the 20 years. And that should have that PFAS information in there. Again, DoD has not established or defined what is normal. They're very reluctant to do that. They're waiting on the EPA and other agencies to sort of come up with something, and maybe they'll adopt it. And for my military folks, military medical records tend to disappear. Mine have disappeared several times. The first time I separated, and then I'm still trying to find my records when I was at Davis-Monthan. Nobody can seem to figure out where those are. So you get a blood test, keep a copy, make triplicates of it, and secure those because you're going to want to see these numbers. Okay, so these averages, CDC NHANES, PFAS averages. So this is what some people think is the normal. It could be interpreted that way. There really is no definitive average. So when we talk about average, you see the geometric mean. That's the scientific average of each of these chemicals. Those that get their PFAS test results, you're going to see these numbers on there. Most everybody, and I think they put on there, most everybody is under the 95th percentile. And a lot of folks call me up and they're like, hey, Kev, what the hell, what does this 95th percentile mean? Basically what it's talking about is that if your levels are under that 95th percentile, 95% of the population has at or below those numbers. So if you look at PFHXS, 4.90 is the 95th percentile. So they're saying 95% of the population, whether it's the 1,993 that were surveyed or an estimate of the U.S. population, have at or below 4.90 nanogram per milliliter in their blood. You're going to see some numbers on here, some dots. We do have firefighters that have replied back to me that have over that. So they're in that 5% window. They're above the norm, if you will. So, I've sent this out to a lot of folks. I think I actually have it on our website. I've sent it out on social media. But if you need a copy of this, then this is just a little chart that I put together from the CDC NHANES report itself. I'll have a link to that as well. But I'm more than happy to send this out and really explain in detail a little bit more as to what these levels mean. So I always go by, we always say, what should be a normal level be? And, myself, Rob Ballot, Dr. Graham Peasley, Dr. Jamie DeWitt, Jeff Kanabe, Diane Cotter, all these folks I've been working with, Jim Brunecka, it's all of these folks. We've all agreed. They said 0 is the normal because, again, PFAS chemicals are man-made. They're not natural. They're man-made. So you should have, a normal person should have 0 in their system. But that's not going to happen because of all the different products. So when they do these testing, they take a lab animal, we'll say a mouse, lab mouse, and they first confirm that mouse has 0 PFAS in their blood. And then they do this testing. Unfortunately, when you're dealing with humans, we've already got PFAS in there. So it's a little bit more difficult to deal with, to do the blood testing because we're already exposed. There's no control subject, if you will, because 99.9% of really everybody has PFAS in their blood. Even infants, that it's transferred over from mother to infant through the blood. So even a baby, brand new born, very likely has PFAS in its blood. So different formats, it all depends on which lab is sending it back. I just threw 2 of them up there. One's a little bit more easy to read, the other one not so much. Okay, so here's this graphic, and for those that unfortunately you can't see it on the podcast if you're just listening audio, but we've got two different lines up there. The geometric mean, it's a blue line. It's the lower of the 2 lines. And then you have the 95th percentile. And this is for PFOA. So a lot of the firefighters, when they chime back to the survey that I did, actually, this is the survey. So I put it on the wrong slide. Those that can see it, it's the DoD Firefighter PFAS blood test survey. Blood test results survey, and I'm going to put a link up there. I'm still collecting data on this. I'm going to leave it up for a while, but a lot of folks they're like, hey, can we see what the data that you've collected already? So this is just a snapshot. I've had quite a bit of individuals that replied back, but yeah, I'm going to put the link out there. It's just a real simple anonymous survey. I don't want to see anybody's personal identifiable information. It's just basically, what's your status? Are you a DoD firefighter active or former? And then you plug your numbers in. And I can't stress this enough, folks. If you have not had a blood test done, don't do the survey. Because I've had to go back through and, a lot of folks are like, oh, I haven't done the survey yet, or they plug all zeros in. Well, okay, that tells me right there you haven't had the survey done. So again, if you haven't had the blood test done, just completely skip over it. Don't put anything in until you had the blood test done. And keep them at the numbers. Don't put any other comments in there. Just keep them as the numbers, because the way this is set up, it's extracting those numbers in and putting it into a chart for me. So, otherwise I got to hand jam, and, I got to go back through all of these results. So, don't, like I said, please, put the numbers in. I encourage everybody to do it. There's, it's completely anonymous. There's no way, I know who's doing the survey unless you email me, right after you do the survey and it says, hey, I just put my numbers in. I can sort of put 2 and 2 together then, as to where you fall in line with the survey taker, because it keeps a tab, 1 through whatever, where you fall in line. But yeah, please plug your numbers in if you had the blood test done, and then I'll keep updating folks, as that. For the military folks, if you're getting any type of pushback on this, let me know, because again, the DoD has no intent to track, trend, and analyze your blood test results. That's sort of what I'm doing here. I'm doing the DoD's job because I take this data and I talk to Congress about it. And I say, here are the results. I talk to my fellow researchers and said, here's what we're seeing. And you're going to see some numbers here in a second. So going back up to Pfda, everybody's pretty much in line with that geometric mean. They're more down towards the bottom. You're looking at, between 1 and 3 nanogram per milliliter. Again, at 95th percentile, if you're under 4.17 nanogram per milliliter, they're saying, okay, you're average or you're the norm. But you see there's a few outliners on there, or outliers, that are above that 95th percentile. I've got one, I think he was like 9 point something. He was way up there. Again, that's for Pfda. Again, that's what, foam manufacturers are saying. Hey, our products don't contain PFAS. They have a little bit of Pfda in it. So what's going on? It's going to be interesting to see this chart update as that C6 foam is being used. And especially as the non-fluorinated foam is being used. So because Pfda is supposed to be removed from those products. So it's going to be interesting to see if these numbers go up or if they go down. Hopefully they go down. So PFNA, pretty much everybody is down around the 0.577 nanogram per milliliter or below it, which is great. There's a few outliers that are past the 95th percentile of 1.190 nanogram per milliliter. We've got a few that are above the 4.0. Again, what's the source on that? We really don't know. We're not there yet. We can't pinpoint where PFNA actually came from. We're hoping to get there. It'll be great. But that's going to be decades probably down the road. PFOS. Now, you've heard me say this. A lot of the big manufacturers, they're saying, hey, we don't produce foam anymore with PFOS, or our turnout gear doesn't have PFOS in it, and blah, blah, blah. And it's, that may be true, but we're still seeing numbers that are up there. So again, where's this source? Now, this one here, 95th percentile, 18.3 nanogram per milliliter. Why is it so high? A lot of people ask me that, and I'm like, that's just what they come up with. That's what the CDC come up with. Again, it should be 0. Every one of these should be 0. You should not see any dots above that that bottom line of 0. But unfortunately we do. And this is data that the DoD really needs to be looking at, is because, even though that geometric mean of everybody that they surveyed, that's where, that their average would be 95th percentile, 18.3 nanogram per milliliter. You have one. We had one person up here. It was almost 25 of PFAS. I don't know if it was a typo or if they're truly at 25 because it's just a single outlier. So it sort of makes me wonder if they just missed a decimal point there. But anyhow, it's above 0. This one really concerns me. PFHXS. Again, geometric mean was 1.18 nanogram per milliliter. The 95th percentile is 4.90 nanogram per milliliter. Those that are watching on YouTube, you're going to see quite a bit of individuals returned on their survey above the 95th percentile. So if the average American, the average consumer, if you will, or whoever is at that 95th percentile, 4.90, and these are just estimates. The CDC has no way of, they didn't test all 300 and over 300 and some million U.S. citizens. They surveyed 1,993, and they make a ballpark estimate. That's science, folks. A lot of estimates, a lot of assumptions, hypotheticals. With this one here, they're saying, okay, we're just estimating, we're we're guesstimating that 95% of the population has at or below 4.90 nanogram per milliliter in their blood. You notice on here, those that are watching, they are above, firefighters are above that. And we don't know why. We have our suspicions because of the foam exposure. AFFF, again, has PFHXS. The Air Force never talked about this. They should be, because PFHXS has respiratory impacts, especially in small children. Among other things. We're not going to get into it here today. You've heard me talk about it in other podcasts. But they keep foot stomping. Oh, it's PFAS and PFOA, and oh, these have environmental impacts. Well, what about PFHXS? You need to be talking about that. And I'm specifically talking to the Air Force senior leaders, Air Force Fire Emergency senior leaders. They've got brand new senior leaders up at the Pentagon. I know who you are. You're going to be hearing from me. I'm going to keep bugging you guys until you respond. That's what I do, like it or not. Because if I don't get a response out of you guys, I'm going to your bosses. And then I'm going to Congress, which I'm already there. And they'll get you to talk. So get ready to be talking in front of a microphone. I had a fantastic chief. That was something he always said. He goes, I don't want to be that chief that has to be talking in front of a microphone. Well, there's going to be some fire emergency service leaders that are going to end up talking in front of a microphone sooner or later. Until they own this. So PFHXS, folks, you can see the numbers are there. The data does not lie. There is a concern, elevated levels. Again, these numbers should be 0. You're looking at these numbers, we're up past 10. A lot of them are between 5 and 10. We've got some, 15. There's someone there at 25. I've got a few outliers up past 25. That is, you compare 25 to 4.90. I mean, that's absurd. And then you look at the geometric mean of those that they surveyed, 1.18, and you're at 25. You're 24, 25 times higher than what the CDC is saying is, quote, an average. And nobody's talking about this within the DoD, and they really need to. I'm talking about it, so I'm not in the DoD. As I said before, former Master Sergeant, retired 2017. But I still look out for my DoD firefighters, and I will, as long as I have the energy to do so. Okay, so, the Department of Veterans Affairs, PFAS stance, this is right off their website, those that can see it. VA does not recommend blood tests to determine levels of PFAS in any individual, because most people in the U.S. have measurable amounts of PFAS in their blood, and as you saw, that's what the whole I'm drawing a blank. Let me go back to the slide here. The 95th percentile. Wow. Old age. So that's what they're saying. Most people, that 95th percentile, they have PFAS in their blood. And normal ranges have not been established. Fair statement. Normal ranges have not been established. Those that have the ability to do so are reluctant to do so, because I think once they do, especially in the VA side, it's going to open up a tsunami of claims, because you're saying, okay, this is what your normal level should be. You're like that one individual, you're at 25. You're 25 times, we'll just say, the normal range was 1 point whatever. You're 25 times higher. Is it service-connected disability? Very likely. That's the other thing too. I'm trying to get presumptives legislation established. We got the Mike Leasig piece of legislation. We got the Neil Hogan piece of legislation, one's for military, one's for federal firefighters, basically saying, hey, if you've got cancer or other medical illnesses, we're going to presume it's associated with AFFF exposure. But there's a lot of pushback on these. They've been sitting in Congress for years, but we need to get them done, and that's what I'm pushing for as we speak. So 2 individuals I want to talk about. My buddy Dan Kaysen, Rockstar Dan Kaysen. And of course, like I said, Neil Hogan. Dan's former military. Neil Hogan's civilian fed fire. To date, these are the only two former DoD military or civilian firefighters known to receive 100% disability rating for the VA for AFFF exposure. And it's because of their Nexus Letters. They had phenomenal Nexus Letters, and a Nexus Letter is basically just your doctor drafting an opinion letter that says, hey, based on my professional opinion, research that I've done, research that's available, I believe this, my patient's cancer or medical illness is associated or directly associated with AFFF exposure. If it's a very well written Nexus letter, the VA pretty much has no defense against it, and that's what happened with these two, Dan and Neil. Their doctors wrote phenomenal letters. They filed their claims and got their ratings on it. Dan's doing well. He's, as you know, I mean, both of these individuals have cancer. I talked to Dan before I went to the conference. He's going through some things. I plan on having Dan on here the next podcast or so. We're going to do a follow-up. I was going to do it for this one, but I just wanted to get something out there, and I'm almost 2 hours into this podcast. So, but yeah, we're going to get Dan on there and Neil as well. So probably what I'll do is I'll try to get them both on there and we can do an update, because I've talked to them both on the podcast before. But it's time to do an update, see how they're doing, and what they're fighting for. So again, we talked about the Nexus Letters. Sadly, a lot of doctors are hesitant to draft these because it's their opinion. They don't want to put their reputation on the line. And I get it, but if they have evidence that shows, or they're the ones that get paid the big bucks to do this research. We don't as patients. And, they should be willing to put their names out there and say, hey, look, the evidence is clear. There is a correlation between AFFF exposure and cancer or other medical illnesses. So I'm going to put it on paper and, work with my patient. That's what they should be doing. So this is a picture, I ended the discussion with this picture. At the top, I said it's just soap and water, and that's what we as military firefighters, civilians, were led to believe. That's foam getting dumped on an individual during it's probably a going away. That's when this type of activity was permitted. It was accepted. Today it's considered hazing. I'm rolling my eyes. But I'm not rolling my eyes at the AFFF. Water is fine. Don't dump toxic stuff on your going away firefighter, for God's sakes. But at least show the individuals that are leaving some love. It's the political correctness on some of this stuff. You can't do, what you can and what you can't do, what you can say, not say, is like, okay, that's a whole, probably another episode. But anyhow, I just want to put this up there to show you, hey, this is what happened in the fire service. Because we were told, hey, AFFF, it's soap and water. It's perfectly fine. It's safe. There's nothing wrong with it. And, here we are, decades later, and we were lied to. We were deceived. We're still being lied to, deceived, and it's time to really step up. So, I'm the voice for a lot of firefighters out there, whether you're military, DoD civilian, municipal firefighters. I go to bat for each and every one of you out there. That's what I do. I'm in that position to where I can do it. I was actually interviewed while I was at the conference out there. And if you haven't been to the Firefighter Health and Safety Conference, I encourage you to do that next year. We're going to have details on that as they come out. They're still recovering because it was a killer event. I'm glad I got invited to go. We actually sponsored, AFSO 21 sponsored portion of it. So, but yeah, get out to these different conferences, these events, and take part and listen to the speakers, listen to what they have to say, take it back and share it with your organizations. But yeah, the big thing, as I end here, the big thing is if you have concerns about AFFF, about PFAS exposure, and you feel that your voice is not being heard, that your concerns are not being taken seriously, you always have an outlet. You always have somebody to turn to. And I'm talking about myself, is that you can always email me. You can always text me. You can message me, get in contact with me. However, and I will take your concerns, your questions seriously. And those that know me well, they know I back that up. I address it to Congress. I address it to other leaders, legislators, whether it be state, local, and I push for change. So yeah, by all means, I encourage you to reach out if you just want to bullshit. I'm more than happy to do that as well. That was the thing. Brothers Helping Brothers was one of the hosts out there that put the conference on. We are the fire service is called a brotherhood. We have female firefighters, so it's a brotherhood, sisterhood, however you want to call it, a family at the end of the day. That's what we are as emergency responders. We need to protect each other because obviously those we entrusted to protect the protectors aren't doing their job. And I'm talking about senior leaders in the fire service, senior leaders in government, and manufacturers of these toxic products. So as my voice withers away here, folks, we're almost 2 hours into this. I've talked long enough. I didn't plan on talking this long, but there was a lot I wanted to address that I didn't get a chance to address out at the conference during my talk. So with that, I'm back. We're gonna probably do every 2 weeks on this podcast because some things that are going on. But if you have topics that you want addressed on here, please share those with me. If you want to be a guest on the podcast, I have an open invitation to individuals who are interested in being a guest. I will be more than happy to talk about you, talk about your organization, talk about questions, anything that has to do with fire emergency services. That's what I'm trying to do is get that information out there. So again, to my military folks, if you if you feel that your concerns are not being addressed, please reach out to me. If you don't want your name affiliated with anything, I tell everybody I respect that. I do not share anybody's information with anybody unless I am told or authorized to do so. So if you contact me with some concerns via email, I'm not going to share your email. I'm not going to share your name. Nothing like that. Anything that I convey beyond that, if you want to remain anonymous, is coming from me, not from the source. So that's something I'm very adamant about. I protect my firefighters. I protect my sources, to the fullest. So folks, with that, that's going to do it for this episode. I just want to give a shout out. We're late here. To all the veterans out there. This past Veterans Day. Past, present, and future. We love you. We respect you. We appreciate the service and sacrifices that you've given this country. And veterans around the world. The same applies. Veterans are veterans. They step up, no matter what country you're in. They're either volunteers or, some countries it's mandatory, but they're serving, and hopefully giving back positive, to their country and the world. So with that, that's going to do it. Probably next episode, maybe around Turkey Day, or just after Turkey Day here in the States, Thanksgiving. We'll figure it out. You'll see it up on social media and the website. So with that, folks, that's going to do it. It's been a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to be able to talk and converse with firefighters from around the world. And literally, I do that. So until next time, as my voice is withered away, like I said before, stay safe. Keep supporting fire emergency services, whether career, volunteer, local. Those individuals, they really need some help in terms of support. So continue supporting your local fire emergency services. And with that, I'm out of here, folks.